Today with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM.
Kathy McMahon is on the line right now. Good morning to you, Kathy.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
I'm very good. And you have a really fascinating story to tell, and we'll get to that in a moment. But when we mentioned on our promos across yesterday that you were coming on to talk about the options for women who find themselves with an unplanned pregnancy, especially those who are forced or were for a very long time to part with their child even though they didn't want to. Yeah. And a remarkable thing happened. A picture frame was left outside the door of the radio station, and it looked like it had been placed there rather than dropped. And it's a photograph of a young woman with blonde hair and her very young baby. Okay. And it says across the frame, "My mum by chance, my friend by choice." And that's all it says. Now, it's a very nice frame. It has a floral pattern. And we are assuming that it is in some way connected to the fact that somebody heard we would be talking to you this morning.
Okay.
So what would you say to somebody? I mean, I don't know if that's a cry for help, or maybe it was coincidental, or what? What do you think?
Well, it could be a mum who lost a child to adoption. And if that's the case, obviously she's possibly living with, a sense of shame and grief. It's known that mothers who lost children to adoption, whether they willingly relinquished, which is very unlikely, because the vast majority of mothers had their babies actually forcibly taken from them. She's, dealing with unresolved grief and post-traumatic stress disorder.
So I suppose the recommendation would be contact us here at the radio station on 461-995 and let us know exactly what you meant, because we are surmising to a degree here. But as I say, this picture and frame were certainly placed because of the way that it was put up against the window of the radio station here on the Dock Road.
That.
Yeah.
I was speaking to one of the radio, one of the personnel there, and I was just saying that, if anybody needs to make contact with other mothers who, we mightn't have, we mightn't be professionally trained as counsellors, but we've gone through the experience, and so, if anybody wants to contact the station, they can get my phone number that way to make contact with me.
Okay, that's great, Kathy. Thank you for that. I thought I knew a bit about this subject, but one remarkable fact is that forced adoptions were happening in this country up to the late 1990s.
That's right, yeah. And possibly even later. Just because the mother and baby homes were no longer in operation doesn't mean that there was still some way of families putting pressure on girls who became pregnant outside of marriage to give their babies for adoption.
What happened to you when you were 17?
When I was about 5 months off becoming 18, I was in a relationship with a first boyfriend, and I became pregnant. When I discovered my pregnancy, I hid that for about 3.5 months, and or longer actually. It was about 5 months. And when my mother discovered that I was pregnant, within a week I was driven to St. Ardwira in Dunboyne, I was driven to Ardwira in Dunboyne, which is a mother and baby home. And I stayed there from January 1974 until April 1974, when my baby was born in Holles Street.
And it is what happened immediately after, or very quickly after your baby was born, that was so horrific.
Yeah, well, I was in Holles Street Hospital for a week after she was born, and I cared for her. And the day I was being discharged from the hospital, I dressed my baby, and although I was aware that that was our last day together, I hoped against hope that it wasn't going to happen. I'd had her baptised the day before in the church, in the chapel, in the hospital, and so I prepared her. I dressed her up in, a little cardigan and so on that I'd knitted for her, and I left her on the bed as I went to get dressed myself. And my sister, who was sent to pick me up to bring me home, picked my baby up, and she was cooing to her and chanting to her, and she was feeling very upset about, what was about to happen. And as I turned to take something from the bed, and I turned back to see my baby, there was a nurse leaving the room with her. So I said to my sister, where's she gone? And she said, she's gone. And that was it.
This was despite the fact that you had made your intentions and your desire clear to keep the baby.
No, actually.
No, you hadn't.
Because I was, as I said, at that stage I was 18 and 5 months or 4 months. And there was never any discussion.
Right. It was just the way it was going to be.
Yeah, it was, there was no discussion.
Yeah.
That was it. Once you were put into Dunboyne, that was it. There was no talk about it.
And how traumatised were you in the wake of that?
I didn't actually realise how traumatised I was. For 21 years later was when I realised the grief that I'd lived with for those 21 years. And sadly, my grief for my first child became obvious to me when I lost my third child in a car accident in 1995.
Right.
So I realised then, and I suppose, and I didn't intend on getting upset, but I suppose, the death of my son, my third child, helped me to bring the grief that was unresolved to the surface. So I've dealt with it.
Yeah.
In the last 20 years.
And did you get pregnant again when you were young?
I did, and it's actually something that's seen quite a lot. Is that when a baby is taken or when a mother loses a baby, she does become. It's not like a replacement, but it's just something we do.
Mm-hmm. And what happened in that second situation?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What happened in that second?
In the second situation, I was working. I had my own money and so on, but and I was going to go to England to have my baby in England and set up home over there with her. But my mother decided that I wasn't doing that, so she sent me to St. Patrick's on the Navan Road.
Mm.
And I was there from August 1975 until December 1975. My daughter was born in October, and I'd kept my plans close to my chest. I didn't discuss them with anybody because I didn't want to give them the option of trying to force me into, giving my baby for adoption again. So I waited until after she was born, and I then told a social worker from the health board that came to visit me every Monday on the behest of my mother, who, because I wasn't seeing my mother at the time, he was, to keep my mother's pressure up. So I told him about 2 weeks after my daughter was born that I wasn't giving her for adoption.
Okay, so a very different situation the second time round.
Yeah, no, there were pressures put on us. I mean, I was in St. Patrick's Home on the Navan Road. The nuns tried to talk us into giving our babies for adoption. There was myself and another girl who was keeping her baby also. And so we started to work together to see could we find a place to live. So it took 6 to 8 weeks for us to find a place because no landlords in Dublin or anywhere wanted a single mother on their premises. So the Reverend Mother at the time in the home called us individually to meet her and told us that we should give our babies for adoption, that our babies would be happy for Christmas, and we could do whatever the hell we wanted.
Yeah.
And that no man would ever marry us if we had another man's child, and so on, to try to pressurise us.
All right, but in that instance, it didn't work. Now, a lot of this has come to the fore again because of discussions around adoption law, and particularly you feel the lack of understanding of mothers who were forced to give up their babies for adoption. Yeah,
well, first of all, I think the majority of mothers in 2015 are at some level, wondering and searching for their child. And like, I represent 57 women in one group, and I know plenty of other women who we never asked for, nor were we offered confidentiality in relation to our identity. And we think that that children who are sent for adoption should be given access to their birth certificates and their medical records.
Are you confident that something along those lines will eventually happen, partly because of the pressure you're putting on?
Well, I mean, at the moment, there's the Adoption Information Bill, which the Minister launched there just before the Dáil recess. And what they're doing, or what it seems that they're doing, is they're asking, once an adopted person reaches the age of 18, that they can apply to get their birth certificates. But they will have to sign a swear an affidavit, I suppose, in front of a commissioner for oaths, that they will not make contact with their mothers or their birth parents, which we think is absolutely horrendous. Our children are not criminals. Asking our children to sign a document saying that they will not make contact, that's absolutely horrendous. Because they're not,
even though they'll argue that that's to protect those mothers who don't want contact.
We don't need protection from our children. And from my work and my involvement before I ever set up Irish First Mothers, and in relation to my own daughter, my first daughter and I reconnected in 2001, from my personal experience and my experience working with other people, mothers and their children that were sent for adoption have the height of respect for each other. They understand the difficult situations that people can find themselves in, whereby adopted people understand that maybe their mothers went on to live a life where they couldn't talk about what happened to them. Mm-hmm. So they're not, adopted people nor mothers go knocking at each other's doors once they find who the other is.
So we should trust all involved, is what you were saying.
Absolutely.
In essence.
We don't need more paternalistic, bureaucracy put between mother and child. Yeah. What we need is, in fact, there are women out there and they long to know, even just to know, what became of their child. And what we need is to encourage those women to, find the information they're looking for. We need to realise as well that, to a certain extent, although whether we were forced or willingly gave our children for adoption, my personal feeling is that we do have a responsibility towards each other. Mm-hmm. And, no mother that I know would like to think that her child, willingly or forcibly given for adoption, spent his or her life wondering and longing to find out how he or she, or who he or she is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about that. Okay, Kathy McMahon, thank you very much for telling us your remarkable story. The Facebook page is Irish First Mothers if people want to know more, and I'm sure there are people listening this morning who've been affected by it. And as I mentioned, that photo frame that came to the station yesterday, if you wish to make contact with us, then that's absolutely fine. If you feel that you need help, there are organisations out there who can help you. Thank you, Kathy.
Limerick Today with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM.